You married my brother?
She stood at the front of a church she had entered as a stranger, in a dress she had not paid for, promising her life to a man whose name she had never once seen at the bottom of a letter. And when the minister said the words that bound her, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the great doors at the back of the church swung open, and two travel-stained figures stopped dead on the threshold, and the taller of them, a man with dust on his coat and disbelief on his face, said the only 4 words that mattered. "You married my brother?" But to understand how Eleanor Hargrove came to be standing in that church, we have to go back 5 days, to a Monday and a train and a platform in a state she had never seen, where the first person to walk toward her was not the man she had come to meet. She had told herself the whole long ride from Kansas that she would know him. A year of letters ought to count for something. She had built a picture of Thomas Reyes from the slant of his handwriting and the shape of his sentences, a man who circled a feeling for half a page before he let himself say it, a man who wrote about his cattle the way other men wrote about their children. So when the train shuddered to a stop and she stepped down onto the platform with her one bag and her mother's brooch pinned at her collar, she was looking for that man. What she found instead was a stranger walking toward her with an easy, confident smile, hat in hand, calling her name as though he'd known her face all his life. Eleanor. Eleanor Hargrove. He said it warmly, and he took her bag from her hand before she had decided to give it to him. "I'd know you anywhere. I'm Thomas. Welcome to Nebraska." She hesitated. It was only a half second, a flicker she covered quickly, but it was there, because the man in front of her was handsome in a polished, deliberate way, his dark hair combed neat, his vest finely made, and there was something in his smile that did not match the letters. The Thomas of the letters was shy about his own warmth. This man wore his like a coat he'd chosen carefully that morning. But she was tired, and she was far from anything she knew, and she told herself that a person's handwriting and a person's face were bound to feel like 2 different people until you'd stood in a room with them a while. So she smiled back, and she let him carry her bag, and she said, "Thomas, it's good to finally..." And he said, "Come, the wagon's waiting. My mother is expecting you." And she followed him, because there was nothing else in the whole state of Nebraska for her to do. His name was Caleb. He was Thomas's younger brother, and he had been reading Thomas's letters in secret for the better part of a year, easing them out of the mail tray before his brother came in from the fields, learning Eleanor's life a page at a time, the drought and the dead father and the ranch she'd lost, until he knew her almost as well as the man she'd actually been writing to. When Thomas had left 4 days earlier to sell the season's grain in a city 2 days' ride to the east, a trip that would keep him gone until Friday, Caleb had seen the shape of an opportunity, and he had taken it the way he took most things, smoothly and without asking anyone's permission, and with a smile that made the taking look like a kindness. He talked the whole way from the station, and that was the first thing that unsettled her, though she couldn't have said why at the time. The Thomas of the letters had been a man of careful silences. He wrote as though words cost him something, and he meant to spend them well. This man filled every mile of the ride with easy, rolling talk about the size of the herd, the price of grain, the men who worked for him, the county families who'd be at the wedding. He told her about the ranch, the way a man shows off a pocket watch, tilting it to catch the light. And Eleanor, who had spent her whole life around men who let the land speak for them, kept nodding and smiling and waiting for the talk to turn quiet and true the way the letters had. And it never did. She told herself he was nervous. A man might talk too much, meeting the woman he was to marry. She told herself a great many reasonable things on that wagon ride, and none of them quite reached the cold, small place under her ribs that had started very faintly to ache. The ranch, when the wagon finally crested the last rise, took her breath away, and not in a good way. She had grown up in a 4-room house 11 miles from a town of 600 people. What spread out below her now was the largest private holding she had ever seen, a great 2-story main house with deep porches and tall windows, a smaller guest house beside it, a separate row of cottages for the hands, barns and corrals and fenced fields running to the horizon, and everywhere, men working, mending, hauling, driving cattle in the far pastures. The Reyes family, Caleb told her with evident satisfaction, were the wealthiest ranchers in the county, He said it the way a man lays down a winning card. Doña Isabel Reyes was waiting for them on the front steps, and she did not come down to meet the wagon. She was a tall, spare woman of about 60, silver-white hair drawn back so tightly it seemed to sharpen her whole face. And she watched Eleanor climb down from the wagon with a pair of cold, appraising eyes that traveled from the worn hem of her traveling skirt to the plain brooch at her throat and back again, and took inventory of every inexpensive thing about her. When she finally spoke, her voice was smooth and cool and edged like something kept in a drawer. "So," she said, "this is the girl from the newspaper." She let the word newspaper sit in the air a moment, the way you'd hold something up by 2 fingers to look at it. "You must be tired from your journey. Carmen will show you to your room. We'll see about making you presentable before Friday." It was said with a small, closed-lipped smile that never once reached her eyes, and Eleanor, who had buried a father, lost a home, and stood dry-eyed at the grave of a man who died saving a dog, recognized it instantly for what it was. She had met hard people before. She had simply never been handed off to one as family. Her room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a long carpeted hall lined with oil paintings and family portraits. And it was, she had to admit, finer than any room she had ever slept in. A high bed with a carved frame, heavy velvet drapes, a washstand with a porcelain basin painted with roses. And yet the moment the door closed behind Carmen, the quiet, careful housemaid who had carried her bag up without a word, Eleanor sat down on the edge of that beautiful bed and felt, for the first time since Kansas, entirely and completely alone. She could not go back. There was no ranch to go back to, no father, no Otis waiting at a gate. There was only forward, into a house that felt like a beautiful, cold museum, toward a wedding on Friday, to a man who did not, she was beginning to feel, quite fit inside his own letters. She went to the window before she lit the lamp. From the 2nd floor, she could see the whole spread of the place going blue in the dusk, the barns, the cottages where the hands lived, the fields running out to a horizon that looked no different, in the fading light, from her own lost horizon in Kansas, the same flat country, the same enormous sky. And somewhere under that same sky, 1,100 miles behind her, a stray dog was learning to sleep by a different man's fire, and a hill held 2 graves she would never stand at again. She had come all this way to stop being alone. It was strange, she thought, to have crossed half a country toward a family, and to feel the loneliness settle deeper with every mile, like a stone going down through water. That night she did the thing she had started doing on the train, the thing that would become her only true companion in that house. She took out the small cloth-bound journal she'd bought at a station stop, and she uncapped her pen, and by the light of a single lamp she wrote down what she could not say to anyone else. "He met me at the station and knew my name," she wrote. "He has been kind, and yet I keep waiting for the man from the letters to look out through his eyes, and he does not come. Perhaps I have simply fallen in love with my own idea of a person. Perhaps that is what loneliness does. I will know him better tomorrow." She read it back once, and then she closed the journal, and she blew out the lamp, and she lay awake a long time, listening to a house that made none of the sounds her own home used to make. Tuesday, she began to learn the house, and the house began to reveal itself. Don Rufino, the old steward, was the first kindness she found. He was a stout, silver-mustached man of 60-some years who had served the family since before the children were born, and he had a way of appearing with exactly the thing a person needed: a second cup of coffee, a shawl against the morning chill, a quiet word of direction through the maze of the great house, and of doing it so unobtrusively that Doña Isabel never seemed to notice. It was Rufino who told her gently which rooms were hers to use and which the mistress preferred kept closed. It was Rufino who, when she stood too long and too lost in the front hall, materialized at her elbow and said only, "The morning room catches the best light, señorita, if you'd like somewhere to sit," and left her there in a patch of sun with a cup of coffee she hadn't asked for. She found the photos on the fireplace in the morning. They stood in a cluster on the great stone mantel, framed in silver, the whole history of the family arranged in careful poses. A stern, handsome man she took to be the late father, gone some years now, Thomas had told her. Doña Isabel, younger but no warmer. 2 dark-haired boys growing up frame by frame into men. and in the center, given the place of honor, a photograph of a laughing girl of about 16 with light brown hair and bright, mischievous eyes, caught mid-smile as though the photographer had said something funny just before the shutter clicked. "That's Marisol." Caleb had come in behind her, quiet on the thick carpet. "My little sister. She's away at boarding school. She'll be home Friday in time for the wedding." And for just a moment, talking about the girl in the photograph, something in his face softened into what might have been real. "She's the best of us, honestly. Sharp as anything, tongue like a whip, our Sewell. She could run this ranch better than any of us, and she's only 17. Grew up chasing after brother and me, learned to ride and rope and keep the books before she learned to sit still." He smiled at the photograph. "You'll like her. Everyone likes Sewell. She's the only one Mother can't." And then he stopped himself, and the softness closed over, and he turned the smile back on Eleanor like a lamp. "Anyway, she's excited to meet you. Says she's always wanted a sister." Eleanor looked at the laughing girl in the silver frame a moment longer. There was something in the photograph that the rest of that cold, careful mantle did not have. A realness, a warmth, the sense of a person who had refused to hold still and be respectable for the camera. Beside her stood the two brothers as boys, and Eleanor found her eyes going, without quite meaning to the taller and older of the two, a serious-faced boy with steady eyes, standing a little apart, one hand resting protectively on his small sister's shoulder. She did not know why she looked at him. She did not yet have a name for the pull of it. But she stood in front of that photograph of a brother she had never met and felt, absurdly, more understood by the boy in the picture than by the grown man standing warm and living at her side. She turned away from it before the feeling could take shape and told herself she was being foolish and that a photograph was only silver and paper and light. It was, Eleanor thought later, writing it down that night, the only moment all day that Thomas had seemed like a person instead of a performance. "When he spoke of his sister, he forgot to charm me," she wrote, "and for a breath he was almost someone I could trust. It's strange. It is only ever the small things that feel true in this house." Because the rest of Tuesday had not felt true at all. Doña Isabel had summoned her to the sitting room after the noon meal, looked her over again with that same drawer-cold assessment, and pronounced her wardrobe impossible. A seamstress would come the following morning. The family had a reputation to consider. One did not stand up in the county church in a dress that had crossed 3 states on a homesteader's back. She said it all with the thin smile of a woman offering a great generosity, and every word was built to remind Eleanor exactly how far beneath the Reyes name she had arrived. "We can't have people thinking Thomas married a pauper," she said, and then, as if she'd heard herself, "Though of course love makes its own arrangements, doesn't it?" Eleanor said, "Thank you for your kindness, Doña Isabel," in a voice so level and so polite that the older woman's eyes narrowed a fraction, because she had expected the girl to flinch and the girl had not. It was a small thing, but Eleanor had learned, in a hard year, that you could hold a boundary without raising your voice, and she held this one the way she'd hold a fence post, quietly and with both hands, and without giving an inch of the ground underneath it. Wednesday, the seamstress came, and the house tilted suddenly toward a wedding. The seamstress was a brisk, kind-faced woman from the county seat who spread bolts of fabric across the morning room, silks and fine cottons in colors Eleanor had never worn in her life, and began to build around Eleanor's plain frame the kind of dresses she had only ever seen through shop windows. And it should have been a joy. Another woman might have wept for gladness at it, but Doña Isabel supervised every fitting from a high-back chair in the corner, and she turned each measurement into a small blade. "Let the waist out. Country girls are broader through the middle. Nothing too fine at the collar. We don't want it looking like she's reaching above herself." You can always tell breeding in the hands, and hers have done a man's work, poor thing. Each remark delivered in that same silken, smiling voice, so that if Eleanor had objected, she would have seemed to be the unreasonable one, taking offense at kindness. And through it all, Caleb played his part beautifully. He appeared at the edges of the day, exactly when a woman drowning might want a hand, to walk her out to see the horses when the fittings grew unbearable, to tell her, low and warm, not to mind his mother, that Isabel was hard on everyone, that things would be easier once they were married and settled. He was attentive. He was gentle. He remembered, or seemed to, the small things from the letters, her father's fences, the dog, the drought. And Eleanor kept waiting to feel, in his company, the things she had felt reading those letters alone by lamplight in Kansas, that quiet, unhurried closeness, that sense of being known. And it would not come. He said the right words, and they landed wrong, the way a familiar song sounds, wrong sung half a step off key. She could not have told anyone what was the matter. There was nothing she could point to. He was kind to her, and still, some animal part of her, some instinct honed by a lifetime of reading weather and cattle and men, kept its ears back and would not settle. There was one moment, that Wednesday afternoon by the corral, when the truth had come very close to the surface. Caleb had been showing her a fine bay mare, and Eleanor had leaned on the fence and said, half to herself, that Thomas had written her once about breaking horses gentle, about how his father had taught him you could ruin a good horse forever by rushing it. That patience was the whole art of it. And Caleb had gone still for just a breath, something flickering behind his eyes, and started to say, "Eleanor, there's something I ought to." And in that moment, that single fragile moment where the whole house of cards leaned toward falling, Doña Isabel's voice had come sharp across the yard. "Thomas, a word!" And he had shut his mouth and smoothed his face and gone to his mother like a boy called to heel, and left Eleanor at the fence with the mare and the unfinished sentence and the growing sense that she was standing in the middle of something she could not see the edges of. When she glanced toward the house, Doña Isabel was speaking low and fast to her son on the porch, one hand gripping his arm, and Caleb was nodding, and neither of them was looking at Eleanor at all. It was Wednesday evening that Doña Isabel announced the wedding would be Friday. Not in 2 weeks, as Eleanor had vaguely assumed. Friday, 2 days away. "Why wait?" the older woman said smoothly when Eleanor's face betrayed her surprise. "You've nowhere else to be. And Thomas is impatient, aren't you, my darling?" It was framed as romance. It felt like a door closing. And Eleanor understood, sitting at that long, polished dinner table under the eyes of a woman who despised her and a man she could not read, that she truly had nowhere else to be. No money for a ticket back, no home at the other end of one if she'd had it, and that the current of this house was carrying her somewhere fast, and she did not know how to swim against it without going under. That night, her journal held the loneliest entry yet. "I do not know how to name what is wrong," she wrote. "He is kind, and I should be grateful, and instead I lie awake. Maybe it is only that I have never in my life had a place to belong, and so belonging feels like a lie even when it is offered. Maybe the wrongness is in me. Friday. I will marry him, because there is no road that leads anywhere else from here. I wish I could ask Caleb what he thinks." She stopped and looked at what she'd written, the wrong name, the right instinct, and did not understand why her own hand had betrayed her, and crossed it out and wrote, "I wish I could ask someone," and blew out the lamp. Thursday, the cracks she couldn't name began, very quietly, to show themselves. It started small. At breakfast, Caleb mentioned the letter where she'd first told him about losing the ranch, and he had a detail wrong. He said the bank had foreclosed in winter, and it had been spring, and it had not been a foreclosure at all in the end, but a lapsed grace period, and she had written all of that out to Thomas in 3 careful pages. She corrected him lightly, and he laughed it off. So many letters, I lose track. But it sat oddly, because the Thomas of the letters had never once lost track. He had remembered everything. He had quoted her own words back to her months later. This man remembered the shape of her story, but kept fumbling its details, like an actor who's read the summary but not the script. Then, late in the morning, passing the kitchen, she heard Lupe, the young housemaid, barely 19 and always flustered, say to Carmen, "Should I put the good linens in Don Caleb's?" before Carmen hushed her sharply with a look. Don Caleb. Eleanor stood in the hallway a moment. She had heard it, and yet it slid past her understanding the way a word in a foreign language slides past. She knew it meant something. She could not make it mean anything, and there were 100 reasons a maid might say a name, and she was so tired and so far from home that she filed it away in the same drawer where she'd put every other small wrong thing, and closed the drawer and went on. The confrontation with Doña Isabel came that afternoon, and it was the closest the older woman ever came to dropping the silk. Eleanor had asked, Reasonably, she thought, whether she might write to let a friend back in Kansas know she'd arrived safely. Otis, she meant, though she didn't say his name. And Doña Isabel had gone still and cold and said that the family did not air its business to strangers, that Eleanor's Kansas life was finished now, that the sooner she understood she belonged to the Reyes household and its expectations, the easier her life here would be. "You've been given a great deal," she said, "more than a girl in your position could have dreamed. I would think very carefully, if I were you, about seeming ungrateful." And Eleanor, quietly, without heat, standing very straight, said, "I am grateful for the roof and the food and the dress, Doña Isabel. I am not grateful to be spoken to as though I were bought. My father raised me to know the difference." And she inclined her head, polite as anything, and walked out of the room, and left the older woman sitting alone with an expression that no one in that house had put there in 20 years. She walked after that because she did not know what else to do with the shaking in her hands, and her walking took her down a hallway she hadn't been down before, past a door standing half open on a room that was plainly a man's, plain even, in the way the rest of the house was not. A narrow bed, a shelf of worn books, a saddle blanket folded over a chair, a window looking out at the fields rather than the drive. And on the small desk by the window, a wooden box, its lid open, and inside it, she saw before she could stop herself from seeing, a stack of letters tied with string. Her letters. Her own hand on the topmost envelope, the paper soft with handling. She stood in the doorway with her heart going strange and hard, and she understood that this was Thomas's room, the room of the man she had actually written to, and that her letters lived here, read and kept and tied with string, in a room that belonged to someone who was not the man she was marrying tomorrow. And still, she could not make the pieces fall into their terrible order. She thought, "He keeps my letters in his brother's room." She thought, "How strange that Caleb keeps them here." She reached almost for the truth, and her tired mind slid off it one final time, because the truth was a thing too cruel and too strange for a decent person to arrive at on her own. She pulled the door softly closed and walked away, and did not know that she had just stood 3 feet from the answer to every wrong thing she had felt all week. It was Rufino who found her afterward on the back porch, looking out at the fields with her arms wrapped around herself. He didn't say anything about what he'd surely heard. He just set down a cup of coffee on the rail beside her and stood a moment and said, in a low voice, almost to himself, "You know, Señorita, the young Master Thomas, he is different from his brother, very different. The one who writes letters and the one who does not." And then, as if he'd said too much, he tipped his head and went back inside, and left her standing there with a cup of coffee going cold in the evening air and a sentence she could not begin to unravel. That night she wrote, "Something is wrong in this house and everyone knows it but me." She underlined it twice and sat looking at it for a long time and could not for her life take the next step, because the next step was too strange to think, that the man she was to marry on Friday was not the man she had come to marry at all. It was too much. People did not do such things. And so she closed the journal on the truth without ever quite touching it, and told herself that tomorrow she would be married, and that afterward, surely, everything would finally settle into sense. Friday came bright and busy and terrible. The house woke before dawn to the clatter of a wedding, Carmen and Lupe running with linens and flowers, the long tables being dressed, the smell of cooking rising through the floors, Doña Isabel moving through it all like a general who has finally won a campaign she never wanted to fight. From her window, Eleanor watched the yard fill with the machinery of celebration, wagons arriving with hired help, great swags of white cloth being carried into the barn that would hold the wedding feast, men in their Sunday clothes leading horses, the whole enormous prosperous world of the Reyes ranch turning itself out to witness a marriage. It should have looked like joy. It looked from the second-floor window like a current she was about to be swept into and under, and she stood watching it with her hands cold and her breakfast untouched on its tray. Carmen and Lupe came to dress her. Lupe, the young one, could not stop exclaiming over the gown, over Eleanor's hair, over how fine she looked. And there was something in the girl's flushed, nervous chatter that seemed almost like an apology, as though she were talking fast to keep from saying something else. Once, pinning up a loop of Eleanor's hair, Lupe caught her eye in the mirror and opened her mouth and seemed, for one trembling instant, on the very edge of speech. And then Carmen said, "Lupe, the veil," in a flat, warning voice, and the moment passed and the girl looked down and said nothing more, and Eleanor filed it away with all the other small wrong things she was too far gone now to examine. The finished dress was the most beautiful thing she had ever worn, pale and fine and fitted to her at last, and when she stood in front of the glass with her sun-browned hands against that pale silk, she did not recognize the woman looking back. She looked like she belonged in this house. She felt like she was disappearing into it. She thought of her father, who had never in his life seen her in anything finer than a Sunday cotton, and wondered what he would have made of all this. The silk, the silver, the cold woman downstairs, the smiling man who did not fit his letters. He would have taken one look at Caleb, she thought, and known. Her father had always known a thing's true weight in his hands. She wished, standing there in her borrowed beauty, that she had even a fraction of his certainty. Instead, she had only the dress and the veil, and the morning running out from under her like sand. They dressed her, and they veiled her, and they took her to the church in the county town in a fine black carriage. And the whole way there, Eleanor sat with her hands folded and her instinct screaming and no words to give the scream. Caleb rode alongside, handsome in a dark wedding coat, and he caught her eye through the carriage window and smiled at her, warm, triumphant, certain, and she made herself smile back and thought, "This is my life now," and could not make the thought feel true. The church was full. The county had turned out to see the wealthy Reyes family marry off a son, even a son marrying a nobody from Kansas, and Eleanor walked the aisle on Rufino's arm, there being no one else to give her away, past rows of curious strangers toward a minister and a man she did not love and could not read. She was aware, walking, of the old steward's arm steady beneath her hand, and of how strange it was that the only person in this whole county who had shown her plain kindness was a servant who had known her 4 days. He walked her slowly, the way a man walks who wishes the aisle were longer. Once, halfway down, she felt him hesitate, felt his arm tense under her fingers as though he were about to stop, about to turn to her and say something. And then he drew a breath and walked on and delivered her to the altar and stepped back with his eyes lowered and his jaw tight, and Eleanor did not understand until much later what it had cost that good old man to hand her over and hold his tongue. Doña Isabel sat in the front pew in dark silk, watching with a thin, satisfied smile. Caleb waited at the altar, handsome and certain, and when Eleanor reached him, he took her hand and smiled down at her with such warmth that half the church must have thought it a love match. And Eleanor took her place beside him and told herself one last time that the wrongness was in her, and that after today it would go quiet. The minister spoke the old words. He asked if anyone knew a reason these two should not be joined, and the church held its breath in the way churches do, and no one spoke, because the only two people in the world who could have spoken were still, at that moment, 2 miles down the road, one coming home early from selling grain, one coming home from school for her brother's wedding, neither of them yet knowing whose wedding it truly was. The minister went on. He asked for the vows, and Caleb gave his in a clear, warm, confident voice, and Eleanor gave hers in a quieter one, and somewhere underneath the words her heart kept up its steady, wordless refusal. And then the minister smiled and lifted his hands and said the words that make two people one. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." And at the very back of the church, the great doors swung open on a wash of daylight, and 2 travel-stained figures stopped dead on the threshold. A tall man with dust on his coat, and a young girl with light brown hair and a school coat still on her shoulders. And the whole church turned to look. And the man's face went from confusion to disbelief, to something breaking open all at once as he looked at the bride, at his bride, standing at the altar beside his own brother. "You married my brother?" The girl beside him, 17 and sharp as a whip even now, even here, looked from her brother's ruined face to the altar and back. And Eleanor, still in her veil, still holding the hand of the man who had stolen a year of letters and worn another man's name like a coat, looked at the stranger in the doorway, then at the man beside her, then back at the stranger. And somewhere in that small, terrible triangle of glances, the last piece fell into place, the way a key turns in a lock you didn't know was locked. Her face did not crumple. She did not gasp. She only went very still, the way she went still when things were too large to hold, and her eyes filled slowly, and 2 tears tracked down through the powder and the silk and the borrowed beauty, one for everything she had trusted, and one for everything she now understood. And she did not look away from Thomas Reyes. Not for a long moment, not until she had seen in his face that he already knew what had been done in his name, and that it was breaking him too. Thank you for spending time with me today. If this story touched you about the loneliness of belonging nowhere and the quiet courage it takes to trust your own heart when everyone around you says be grateful, I hope you'll join me again. A brother has just come home to find his own life given away. A sister has come home to a secret, and a woman who trusted the wrong smile is about to learn exactly what was done to her. Consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next. Until then, keep the light on the porch.